back in the early days, in the early part of his career, he was a moderate. He was a moderate, and he was fairly unknown. And the way he got to be the leader of his party now in the House was by becoming an extremist almost, seizing those real extreme party views and espousing them day to day, day in and day out. Every speech he makes, every public address he makes in Congress. And, maybe there's a way he could come back to that moderate stance. Then he might earn my respect again.
I think he's going to have no choice to moderate a little because of the Tea Party. Because I think a lot of what the Tea Party's after, while they are somewhat extremist in their own right, as far as balancing the budget, as far as wanting to see this country get past some of its gridlock, I think he's going to have to compromise on some of his other views. But I agree with you, that sort of angry posture that he has had for the last several years. I was just thinking, if you contrast what he's able to get away with in being that polarizing and being that bitter personality, that's not a luxury President Obama has. And maybe it's because of the color of his skin, because it would not be received very well. But at the end of the day, one thing I do wish President Obama would do is create a stronger position for himself. I think what he's struggling with, and I mentioned this before on the show, he's becoming too far into the center, wanting to please all sides. I think it would help him to maybe take a pointer from John Boehner to say, this is what I stand for, and so what if it's a liberal view? So what if it's on the left of where people are? This is what I believe in. And I think people will be more ready to follow him rather than have this opinion of him being somewhat wishy-washy.
Yeah, I've also said this on the show before. Part of your job as being a president is to look and act presidential in everything that you do. And that is where he could benefit from studying what other presidents have done, whether you like or dislike some of the past presidents like, Reagan, Clinton, whoever. Or
even President Bush, who was maybe not well liked for his decisions, but no one discounted the fact that he could make a decision.
Right. And there were times when even he could look presidential, such as, after the September 11th attacks, making the speech with the megaphone to all the workers there at Ground Zero. So there are things that you need to do. There are opportunities you need to seize as a president to look and act presidential. And I haven't seen enough of that out of his administration.
I would have to agree with that one. Well, in other news, I was somewhat surprised by this, that the state of California actually did not legalize marijuana, even though it is available for medical use. In fact, many states have allowed it for medical use. And for those of you who might be interested, so has the District of Columbia, which I thought was very interesting. But it did not pass in California. Surprising, but I guess, people there really thought that would tip over the edge as far as trying to control the substance and all the problems it might otherwise create. I'm torn on this. I think there's not enough research to conclusively say it would be a good or bad thing. But of all the states I thought that might actually pass it, I thought California would.
Yeah, and as you said, it still is available medically in California, the district, and
Colorado,
other places. So my understanding of that whole arrangement is that it's not very rigidly enforced.
That is, in fact, true. The one comment I would make here is maybe it was that sort of prohibition sentiment that might still exist somehow, and it's affecting marijuana, which maybe has plenty of positive things about it on a medical front, but that mentality to say we can't go quite that far and be so liberal about it, and they won. They basically won. They defeated the proposition.
Well, Aastha, speaking of the state of California and laws, Kamla Harris was recently confirmed as the winner in the California Attorney General election.
That's a big one because that race was hung up for quite some time. As you know, the midterm elections went by several weeks ago, and yet this was one race that wasn't decided yet.
Yes, and she's the first African-American and Indian-American to hold the Attorney General's office in the state of California.
That's a very interesting combination to begin with, but to do it of the largest state in the union, that's a significant accomplishment.
Well, Aastha, I'm a big fan of documentary films, and I often get a lot of flack at home because I'll put on current TV and just sit there and watch it for hours if you give me a chance. But one of the best documentary films that I've seen this year was Gasland.
I think we talked about it, actually, the last time you were on the show.
That's right. We talked about Gasland, and that was a documentary film made by a gentleman named Josh Fox, who wanted to expose the health risks of drilling for natural gas in the United States.
specifically shale, which I know I've read a lot about in the news because there's so much shale, particularly on the East Coast, that people think it's an unlimited supply of natural gas, but it comes with a price.
That's right, a huge environmental impact. And Mr. Fox has gone through all these communities where all this natural gas is being released and freed to come to the surface. And he documented some pretty graphic environmental consequences of this, some of which include people who can light their tap water that comes in their home on fire because there's such a huge amount of natural gas that leaks out with their water supply. Well, Mr. Fox is actually up for an Oscar for short documentary films. He's been in Washington, D.C. He screened his film for Congress, the EPA, as well as the Department of Justice. So I thought it was worth a mention on the show.
So the movie that you picked while watching current TV actually has made it to the major spotlight and hopefully will get its proper due with an Oscar. That would be great. Well, sticking to the environment for a minute, this is a story that might grab attention at home. Many of us are familiar with the chulha. You know, in many developing nations around the world, people are using these biomass stoves that are often using things like cow dung, let's just call it what it is, to basically light the stove. And many people use this to cook. In fact, there are over 3 billion